All right, we're live. I'm going to send out a tweet right now. All right. All right. Well, we are live. Let's see. Take it off the screen over here. All right, we're ready to get going. All right, everybody. Keith Niebuhr and Corey Bender of Gators Online. We're both sick physically, and I'm sure you're sick physically and mentally after watching what we all just saw. Florida's disappointing 33-14 loss in Lexington, Kentucky to the Kentucky Wildcats. Florida went into the game ranked number 22 in the country, but looked like anything but a ranked team. Florida is now 3-2 overall, 1-1 in the SEC. And quite frankly, this is, the question that needs to be asked now is that, 5 games into the season, what is Florida? We thought that maybe the Utah game was the anomaly. But now you have to ask the question, is the Tennessee game the anomaly? Now, that was at home, obviously, and Florida played a fantastic game for one half that day. But is that game the anomaly? So a lot of question marks with this team. I mean, you seem to get more questions than answers from this team, Corey, right now.
Yeah, I just think when you look at this, at the team now, they want to be a physical team up front, right? Their identity, they have 2 really good running backs, one of the better probably tandems in the SEC. But as far as their identity up front in the trenches where they're lacking on defense and offense, I feel like that's obviously hurting them. And you look downfield, I think Graham Mertz has been reliable, 25 out of 30 today. He makes the throws. They don't extend the field too much. And I think with Florida, they try to keep it. So I thought also a big thing today was how conservative they were on third down. I thought they could have used Graham Mertz, maybe get him out of the pocket a little bit more on those short downs on 4th and 3, 4th and 4. But hey, I'm not the coach. So, but it was definitely kind of one of the more uninspiring performances, I think.
Yeah. And again, for those that are just now joining, we just launched this a couple minutes ago. Both Corey and I are kind of on the back end of 2-week illnesses, so we want to apologize to everybody for not having our usual energy. And God, I tell you, Florida didn't look like it had any energy out there, Corey, for the first quarter and a half. It looked like guys weren't physical at the point of attack. The offensive line sort of got manhandled. The defensive line was not itself. I'm sorry, I'm getting blasted with text messages here, of course, as we try to put together a show. But it was
I was going to say, too, Keith, while you're doing that, just real quick, I mean, Florida, I think one thing, lost 15 out of the last 17 games away from the swamp. And you look at this team when they're on the road, when it's adversity, highly penalized, a lot of kind of looking around, trying to see what the answer is. And they just look like a whole different team when they travel away from Gainesville.
Yeah, I mean, mental mistakes. But, you could live with – look, I don't want to say you could live with the mental mistakes, but you felt like after the Utah game, okay, if you can clean up these things, maybe that this could be a decent team. And then you go out and you play well against Tennessee at home. But today was – less about penalties, and the refs did miss one late in the game, but less about penalties and mental mistakes and more, quite frankly, about physicality, about point of attack, blocking and tackling. Where's the tackling, guys? You saw it. Corey and I saw it. There wasn't any.
I think that was the definition of the first half.
And straight up execution. So it really was, I'm laughing at some of the comments here. It really was just an all-around beatdown. And we haven't seen that in a while with a Florida team at Kentucky. Like, I don't remember what the score was a couple days ago, but this is reminiscent of like 1970s stuff, Corey, to go up there and really lay an egg like Florida did today. And look, it happens. These things happen. But when you win 31 straight in a row against a team, you get conditioned to think that it's never going to happen against that program again. And now here you go. Florida's lost 3 straight games to Kentucky after not having lost to them since 1986. So it's very concerning. So let's take a look at some of the stats. And, these are really troubling stats. First and foremost, Kentucky, and we should go in Florida coming into this game was number 5 in the country in total defense, okay, against a schedule that included, 2 top 15 teams.
Yeah.
So you're thinking, okay, this is a legit defense. 244 yards a game allowed per game by the Gators coming into today. So what does Florida do? They give up 259 yards in the first half alone, including over 200 to the running back for Kentucky, okay, Ray Davis, who finished with 280 yards and 3 touchdowns on 26 carries, okay? So that's just mind-blowing to start. Number 5 defense in the country, number 1 total defense in the SEC. 244 yards a game allowed. Kentucky had 259 at the half. And that was with Florida with a long drive in the second quarter that ate up a lot of clock. Otherwise, it could have been worse. Kentucky finished with only 398 yards, kind of a similar situation we saw Utah. Kentucky got the big lead and then just sort of played conservatively the rest of the way, knowing that Florida was never going to score. This is not a team built to catch up, okay? Now, one of the most misleading stats in this game, and I'm not gonna say take too many shots at Graham Mertz here, but when you look at his final game stats, Corey, 25 of 30, 244 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. The interception was right in the guy's hands. He got hit, a ball went up in the air, and other guys caught it. So that means only 4 other incompletions. You look at those numbers, and you're thinking, this guy played pretty well. But a lot of those yards were hollow yards. They were hollow yards, as Steve Spurrier used to say, statistics are for assistant coaches and losers. He didn't mean losers like this. He meant people who lost games. You're looking for silver linings, right? But Graham Mertz, Corey, missed a couple key throws early in the game, including one, I believe, on Florida's second drive after they'd fallen behind 3-0. I believe it was Caleb Douglas got open on was it a post corner? He got open.
Yeah.
It was open, wide open. And if you hit him, you're going to score a touchdown and you're up 7-3. And that changes the whole complexion of the game. So this was very similar to the Utah game. Florida gives up a long scoring drive early, then another touchdown drive, and they're having to chase. And from behind, Florida isn't an effective running team. And so Florida finished, Corey, how about this? This powerful, potent Florida running game that, again, only had, 13 yards rushing at Utah, had 69 today on 29 carries. 69 rushing yards is not going to win you games when you are a team built to live and die on the run, period, end of story.
Yeah. And the thing is also pretty troubling, too. You look at Florida in the past cycle, they attacked the transfer portal for a few additions along the offensive line, guys that have had plenty of experience as starters in Power 5 conferences. So it seems same with the defensive side, too. Cam Jackson, Caleb Banks. You have a lot of big notable names on both sides of the ball in the trenches. But at the same time, they're kind of coming up short. You look, even in the first quarter, it wasn't a cardio thing or, hey, we're getting pushed. We're tired, it's the fourth quarter. From the snap of this game, from the first snap, I thought Florida was getting pushed off the ball fairly easily. And they have some big guys in the trenches too. So I think the lack of adjustments is something that caught my eye as well, as far as where Florida, you can kind of see where Florida was lacking in this game. And I just felt they kind of kept rolling out the same game plan. So I just think this Vanderbilt game coming up against, they lost to Vandy last year on the road. So that's not a gimme game by any means. So after this loss, it's going to be interesting to kind of see the identity of this team and where they are mentally.
I'm just not seeing the talent level that we're used to seeing. And I think that was mostly illustrated. Even Jesse Palmer, the former Gator quarterback who called the game, the start of the second half, he said, look, that Florida's getting dominated at the point of attack, okay? And that was evident. So I'm less inclined to – I'll let the fans criticize the play calling and all that stuff. That's fine. I'm not saying you can't do that. I just feel like I'm a kind of a neophyte when I'm just not like – I'm not an X's and O's guru, so I'll stick to what I know. And when I see talent, I just don't see a ton of it on the lines of scrimmage for Florida. But I thought I saw more of it on the defensive line coming into this game, and they, quite frankly, did not have a solid game. Now, Corey, if everybody listening out there, if I would have said, hey, listen, Devin Leary, Kentucky's quarterback, he's going to go 9 of 20 for 69 yards. You would have thought what? You would have thought that Florida would have rolled them today, right? And that wasn't the case because they were able to run the ball so effectively early. And I don't know what was worse, Corey, if you're a Florida fan or Florida coach or Florida player, the fact that Florida was beat at the point of attack time and again on the running plays with Kentucky having the ball, or the fact that defensive players took bad angles and had so many missed tackles. And so it was kind of a confluence of all these bad things. Getting beat at the line of scrimmage, getting beat at the point of attack. I know some people say those are the same things, but and then bad angles, missed tackles. And then, honestly, I watched some of those replays. I got to tell you, it didn't look like there was a ton of effort at the back end of some of those plays. Once Kentucky got past you, you never know what's going to happen. A guy could fall, the ball could come loose. So it just wasn't – it just looked like one of those games very early on. And, Corey, we both picked Kentucky to win – Florida to win. We didn't know what to make of Kentucky. They hadn't played anybody. They literally hadn't played anybody. And I made the point of saying, look, they could be pretty good. We don't know. But that was the point. We don't know. And it turns out Kentucky is pretty decent. But, the fact that Florida, when they fell behind 10-0, you could kind of get that sense. This had a chance to get ugly, and it did. Now, it was not a 40-point loss, but 2 different times it was 23 points. And there's no way on earth Florida should ever be behind Kentucky by 23 points, or really anybody in the SEC. I'm not taking a shot at Kentucky.
Yeah.
They've done a hell of a job, that staff up there. But 23 points in the first half, you're down midway through the second quarter. And, at that point, you had less than 50 yards of offense. Your defense was getting gashed. Oh, and back to Graham Mertz. The stats are sort of misleading. He, 25 of 30, 244 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. The 2 touchdowns, one of them came when they were down 23-0. Another one came when they were down 30-7. Look, they still count. We're not taking away from that. But same thing with Utah. His best passing numbers came when Florida was out of the game, essentially. But early in the game, he missed that throw. I guess was it Caleb Douglas, who was open early. And
it was Doug. Yeah, you're right. It was Douglas.
Yeah, I thought that was just a crucial play because you can quiet the crowd. And, historically, that is a deceptively loud crowd, an enthusiastic crowd. And so they had a chance to kind of settle in early and kind of send a message that, hey, we're in this game, and they didn't do it. And when it's 23-0 for all intents and purposes, it was effectively over. I mean, Florida scored 14 points, and you could say, okay, but they had some missed opportunities, but they weren't in the red zone a lot.
I thought the one word that comes to mind for me, Keith, is deflating.
Yeah.
And you see their body language throughout the game too. When Florida fell down early, and I think, like you said perfectly, Keith, Florida's not built to kind of come from behind. They want to run the ball. They want to do play action, kind of dump it over the top. That's what they kind of bread and butter, what they stick with. So once they fell behind early, it was going to have to take a few turnovers on the defensive side of the ball. Jason Marshall, I believe, he probably could have had a pick 6. That was one play I know they wish they could have back. And then you just kind of look at their body language, though. You can kind of see, as this team, it's a young team, them trying to regroup on the road, their first SEC road game of the season. And you have guys like Jordan Castell, a lot of guys that haven't played in these type of environments yet. So I just think it's from a maturation process. I think this team has to get mentally stronger, has to mature a little bit as well. So it's going to be interesting. I just want to see how this team regroups, and that's the biggest thing going forward.
Well, they have to look to have a winning record, and you have to take incremental steps. And you don't have to, but that's what they're trying to do here. How do I say this? That's not exactly what I'm trying to say. You as a fan want to see improvement. If you don't get it a big jump, you at least want to see incremental improvement, right? So incremental improvement, first and foremost, would be to have a winning record this season. And so you start looking at the schedule, and Florida's played 2 games away from home, and they've now lost both of them and been, quite frankly, humiliated in both. Not by score, but by everything else, right? Like, it would have been worse 44-0, sure, but it just – things didn't look right in either game, right? And that's humiliating. So then you look at who they play on the road coming up. You've got Vanderbilt at home, but then you go to South Carolina, which hasn't looked good at all. But that's going to be a tough place to play. You also play at LSU, which is doing what they did last year, seemingly, getting a little bit better each week. You have to play in Jacksonville against Georgia. Right now, you're thinking no chance. You then have to go to Missouri late in the year, and shoot, they're off to a good start. So you start.
How many people would favor Florida right now going to Missouri?
How many games has Florida favored and left this season? Yeah. 1 right now? 1?
Yeah,
well, that only gets you to 4 wins.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, excuse me, we play that game ceiling and floor every week. And last week, I think it was and somebody texted me after the game. We were talking about how bad Florida looked against Charlotte. They said, come on, man, that's a complete overreaction, Keith. This is, by anybody, this is a classic letdown game. You just beat your big rival, Tennessee. You're playing a terrible team at home. It's natural. Okay. So if that was an overreaction, what would the reaction be for this game? What should the reaction be for this game? Again, I go back. You've played 5 games now. You've played 3 Power 5 teams. You played well in one of them. But against Utah, you didn't play well really in any of the 4 quarters. And I know the defense held them late, but you again, I still maintain that Utah sort of shut things down knowing that the game was over. And then you look bad. Really, you outplayed for all 4 quarters today. And against Tennessee, you had a great first half. Second half, pretty even. So you basically played well in 2 to 3 quarters of the 12 quarters in those games against Power 5 teams. So is that what you are? At a certain point, you are what you are. And we're going to find out in the next 2 weeks, because first of all, they have to take care of business and beat Vanderbilt. Otherwise, things are really going to go sideways, potentially in a hurry. And historically, we've seen this happen to some pretty decent Gator teams that had, decent starts and then lost games at places like Vanderbilt or Memphis or whatever. And then things went sideways fast. And so you have to guard against that. Now, Florida can win these next 2 games, go into the Georgia game 5-2. People would see progress. But right now, they're getting a little bit I think people are going to be antsy again, Corey. I think my guess is they're going to be even more antsy now after this game than against Utah, which seemed to be more excusable. First game of the year. You're on the road, way out there. Travel plans got interrupted by the hurricane. Utah's the defending Pac-12 champion. And sure, they were missing some guys, but, I think people excuse that one a little bit more than they're going to excuse this one. Quite frankly, I don't know whether it looked like Florida wasn't prepared. I'm sure they were. I mean, you're prepared. You just have to execute. But perception, they didn't look like they were ready to roll today. They didn't look like they were ready to get out there and mix it up with Kentucky, which again, physically, somebody says, quit making excuses for the Gators. Hold on.
Even recruiting, though, how does this affect recruiting? In my opinion, I think this is one of those games where you talked to a lot of big kids like LJ McCray and Zay Mincy. They all kind of said, hey, they came out kind of slow against Utah, but they bounced back against Tennessee. You keep hearing that Tennessee game. But then you come back to me, in my opinion, I feel like you kind of saw who Florida was in this game. And I think Jesse Palmer said a good point too. It's good when you're in Florida, you're playing at home and the crowd's on your side. And there's a lot of momentum swings that go in your favor. But at the same time, I feel like with this Florida team, and I mean, you have to also look at the coaches too, play calling wise. There was a lot of questionable play calls, in my opinion, today on third down, even though they were playing at times for 4 downs, trying to cut that third down in half so it's a little bit easier on fourth. But also, you kind of got to look in the mirror for Billy Napier. There's sometimes you got to look at the staff. Even late in the game, they actually were on the field to go for a 2-point conversion. And I think the announcer said, and I said, it doesn't really matter if you go for a 2-point here. It's still going to be that same possession type of game. And then they fixed that, after the timeout. I think it was injury timeout. So I just think overall from players, from a discipline standpoint, getting more physical, and then also with the coaching staff, I think this is a well-rounded issue that has to get fixed.
Well, and if you look at this game as a whole, you say, okay, well, if I'm a Florida fan, what positive can I take from this, right? Well, now you've got, and we'll get back to recruiting in a minute because both of us cover a lot of recruiting, but for a Florida fan, what's the positive that you're going to take from this? Well, they didn't quit. Okay, whatever. I mean, I'm not giving you a cookie for that. I mean, you're paid to play, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
These are professional athletes. These are now professional athletes. Okay. So they did what they were supposed to do in that regard, right? A lot of mistakes, beaten at the point of attack, lost the physical battles, didn't tackle well, didn't look as mentally sharp as the other team. And Corey, we haven't even got to the big special teams blunder yet, right? Where Florida was still in the game, forced a punt. Can you explain to me what happened on that play, Corey? Yeah, I totally missed it. So
I'm 4th down. So basically,
in a nutshell for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. So the defender hurdled over the line of scrimmage, which if you guys saw the Green Bay Lions game, the same thing happened for Green Bay. Green Bay the other night, they jumped over the line of scrimmage and tried to hurdle it to block the field goal, which is obviously a penalty. And it goes back, obviously, I think it was Deshaun Johnson, the true freshman. People were saying, did he even know that was a rule? I don't think a lot of kids probably don't even know that's a rule, truthfully. I think if you went around, you actually asked a lot of college kids and asked if they knew they could do that or not. I think a lot of them would kind of be up in the air about it. But it goes back to kind of a discipline thing, man. I mean, that's why you have special teams coaches. That's why you have people in place to kind of let those young guys know. And, I mean, whether he knew about it or not, it still was a big turning point in the game.
I mean, you didn't want Devin Leary to beat you, and he passed for 69 yards. Kentucky went 1 of 9 on third down. They didn't get that. Yeah, they ran for a lot of yards, but they didn't even get to 400 yards. The opportunities were there for it to be a much tighter game. And again, I think if
absolutely
somebody's saying that's a lie, I don't know. This guy's saying they quit. I don't know.
I thought at times, I wouldn't say quit, but I thought at times you could tell them, you could the game's out of reach, their heads were down. You could kind of tell it was defeating. I don't know about quit, but it definitely.
I want to say Chris Potter mentioned he thinks Florida quit. The only reason I'm not putting that up on the screen is because there's a sort of a profanity in there. Chris, I didn't want you to think I was ignoring you there. So let's talk about recruiting. Well, let me get back to the missed opportunities. The long pass on the second drive of the game, the potential pick six that Jason Marshall should have caught. And God, you got to make that play, man. You've got to make that play. This is not
especially as a potential first rounder that you've been linked to. Those are the big plays those guys make,
What we've learned is this isn't a team that has much margin for error. Okay. They're not going to have a lot of big touchdown plays, not a lot of chunk plays. They don't force a ton of turnovers, a decent defense up until today. So they have to take advantage when things like that come their way. So to drop that was significant, that the potential pick six. To not have Graham Mertz hit Caleb Douglas on the second drive of the game on the bomb. I keep harping on that because, again, that gives Florida the lead if it's converted, and that changes the whole complexion of things. I mean, could they still lose? Absolutely.
I thought Tebow hit it on the nail early in the week, saying it's all about the line of scrimmage. That's both their identities. And it goes back to say today, I thought Florida, both sides of the ball, were overwhelmed. Yeah. I mean, and that's what's great. Florida has a big line. Their defensive line is big by most SEC standards, and they still were getting pushed back, more often than not.
Some good comments here. I'm trying to get up as many of them as possible. So if I don't get to, I apologize to those of you. Here's an interesting stat here. Florida had the time of possession lead in this game. Isn't that crazy? And I go back to Kentucky being 1-9 on third down. They didn't have many third downs. All those third down conversions that they didn't convert were in the second half. They were running the ball like crazy. I mean, the backbreaker really where you thought, boy, something just ain't right today had to be Ray Davis's 75-yard touchdown run in the first quarter. People had a chance to tackle him. They didn't. I mean, it just wasn't pretty. Again, not good at the line of scrimmage, not good point of attack, missed angles, missed tackles. And then here's another one, guys. Mental mistakes on the road. Kentucky, 3 penalties. A lot of times the home team's going to get less penalties, right? Now, one of those penalties, I think at the end of the game, probably should have been against Kentucky, not against Florida, where the defensive player came in and they called false start on Florida. However, Florida did have 10 penalties in the game. You take that away, they still had 9. They would have had 9 for 81. Again, this is not a team, really good teams. Now, people say, well, wait, does Urban Meyer's teams had tons of penalties? Steve Spurrier's teams had tons of penalties. Yeah, they also had tons of players, too. In a couple of years, Florida may be in that position. But right now, they're not. They are not built with this roster. And somebody was arguing with me on the message board. They think Florida has much more talent than Kentucky. And look, maybe they're right. This is just my opinion. And they're going off high school rankings. But, this is 3-4 years later. Yeah. And, you start looking at that Florida offense, and I'm thinking, okay, is Graham Mertz an NFL quarterback? I don't think so. Who on the offensive line's a surefire NFL guy? I don't know.
Probably only one off the top of my mind is Austin Barber. Eventually, not yet.
Yeah,
but
not yet.
But probably that.
Yeah, ETN, fantastic player, NFL guy all the way. Pearsall, probably. Maybe. Is Pearsall a starter at an Ohio State? I don't know. He's a good player, though. So, it's just let's get to some of these questions here. All right. Justin Johnson says, thoughts on Jamonta Waller visiting Auburn? That's Florida's 4-star. Well, he's listed as an edge commit, but he's actually edge/inside linebacker. Florida views him as being like the next Harold Perkins at Florida, Harold Perkins of LSU, but being like him playing at Florida. He's from Mississippi. So did the staff know he was visiting Auburn? They knew there was a potential for that. Yes, absolutely. I do know that for a fact. I think it's a little bit of a concern. Auburn's really the main team, I think, coming after him at this point. They love him. The defensive coordinator, Ron Roberts, apparently just thinks the world of him. So we'll have to see. Corey, you talked about this earlier. I don't think one loss is going to kill you with recruits. They're looking for patterns, okay? So now patterns are starting to develop after 5 games. Well, they're not winning on the road. They've played 3 good teams, and they've been beaten up pretty good by 2 of them. So
I thought this, 100%.
Yeah, patterns start to develop. Next week it's important that they beat Vanderbilt, obviously. Now you're like, okay, that is where a season absolute must-win. Quite frankly, the biggest win of Billy Napier's tenure, because once you sort of get on a hot seat, whether it's real or perceived, sometimes we all think a guy's on a hot seat and he isn't. But real or perceived, perception is reality to the people out there in the regular world. And so if you're a recruit, people are telling you, hey, look, this guy's struggling. They're not making progress. So that's where losses become an issue. One loss on its own, not that significant. They've told all these recruits, hey, Florida's in rebuild mode. Be patient. You're going to come in. You're going to change this. But like you said, Corey, the big guns still uncommitted. They want to know, is this team making progress? Is this program making progress? And, you can't say that you are if you lose to Vanderbilt 2 years in a row, quite frankly. So, we'll see.
Even LJ McCray, he's the lone recruit, I believe, that I've talked to, big time recruit, that said, when asked about his overall interest in Florida this week, he basically kept saying, I want to be part of something, a rebuild. That's what I like about Florida is what he said. That he was a part of something at Mainland where they turned it around over a couple of years. And that's the most intriguing thing to him, is being part of a class that can turn everything around. At the same time, even though they lost, and like you said, Keith, it's a pattern. A lot of kids said, hey, they saw the Utah game, okay, to the pass, the Tennessee game, okay, that's the Florida Gators we know. But then you come out and you kind of have this game on the road against Kentucky. Yeah. I feel like this is one of those games that I'm not going to say it could affect recruiting a whole lot, but I definitely think it kind of leave that lasting taste in a recruit's mouth about where they think Florida is right now in that growth process.
I've got to hit the mute button every couple of minutes. Again, for those just joining, I'm Keith Niebuhr, and that's Corey Bender of Gators Online. We're both kind of on the back end of a 2-week sickness here. We work with the super spreader, Nick Delatorre, and we're both sick now, and he's up there in Lexington eating steak dinners while we're both in bed under four blankets with the chills. But look, it was a disappointing game today, Corey. But to me, and I'm going to ask you the same question, we're going to ask everybody out there, what was the single most disappointing thing to you? The fact Florida couldn't establish the run, the missed tackles, a little bit of the defense being exposed. To me, it was that Florida really got outplayed on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. And this is a line of scrimmage league, And when you look at the teams Florida's playing coming up, Vanderbilt and South Carolina, will not be as talented on the line of scrimmage probably as Kentucky, but everybody else will be, and maybe more talented, with the exception of Missouri, which we're still learning about. But LSU and Georgia and Arkansas, these are physical teams up front. And if you struggle with Kentucky, it stands to reason you may have trouble with those teams. So to me, Corey, moving forward, I am very concerned about Florida's offensive line, one, and what is the defensive line going to do against really strong teams up front like the team they played today?
I think what concerned me as far as what I learned today overall was, obviously, I think we already knew about the trenches. Florida, obviously, they've been lacking there on both sides of the ball, in my opinion, through the first handful of games. But I think also it goes back to the discipline, also the miscommunication, I feel like, between the staff and players. You'll see a lot of times when there are those penalties, or you'll see kind of those situations in the game where a timeout's called and you're wondering why. There's a lot of confusion on the sidelines, in my opinion, when you look at it closely, and a lot of players just kind of looking around. I just think it's I think it's a group of things, man. I really can't pinpoint one thing. I just thought when I watched the game today, I saw the penalties. I thought, overall where Florida is a program, it's not – they have an identity in place of what they want to be, but it's just not reaching where it should be for them. And, they've hit the portal. They've got guys in the portal that were coveted by other big-time programs, so they've got players. But I guess the more interesting thing for me is just how this young team builds off this loss and kind of regroups and gets back there mentally. I just don't know. I know, like you said, Vanderbilt, year in and year out, that's a game you think, okay, it's almost a gimme. But it's not anymore. You lost at Vanderbilt last year. So this one will be at home. The black uniforms will be a little bit more excitement on campus. But you can't just really rely on these games at home.
Corey, I think the black uniforms are for the Arkansas game.
Arkansas, I apologize. Yeah. So I think overall,
you just killed the momentum there. Yeah.
I know, right? Losing 15 out of your last 17 games away from the swamp, I think right there shows you this team's a whole different team when they travel away from home.
Sorry for all the coughing, everybody. Gosh, this is horrible. Again, if it was one game, you say, look, it's one game, man. But again, the pattern, struggling on the road the last few seasons, struggling against Power 5 teams this season. Offensive line now, 2 poor games against Power 5 teams this season. And so those are the patterns that as a fan or observer of Florida football or somebody on the team that are concerning. I think the big surprise today, Corey, was that the defense, which we thought was making significant progress, really struggled with tackling. Pass defense was fine, but the run defense, although Kentucky, by the way, should be pointed out, had some drops, but the run defense, you've got that big defensive line for a reason, and Kentucky was able to create some big holes, a lot of pulling motion, a lot of guys pulling and creating holes, and then boy, there'd be situations where only 1 or 2 guys were there to even make the play, and they didn't. And it was just, it was a nightmare. It really was a nightmare game for Florida, quite frankly.
One thing I'll add too, real quick, Keith.
Yeah.
Too. Someone said we didn't mention the 13 players on the field.
Oh God,
we haven't mentioned that, but that does go along with the whole miscommunication on the sideline that I was just referring to, where there's just timeouts being taken where it shouldn't be happening at that point. You know what I mean? And that's happened several times, even dating back to last season. So I just feel like the organization, as far as just being organized, that communication standpoint, that's lacking a little bit as well.
All right, so let's just take a quick look back. Florida gets the ball and does absolutely nothing on the first drive, and that's a pattern we've now seen in a few of the games. And first drive for Kentucky, 81 yards, 12 plays. Then there's an interception, and they have a short field, and they get a touchdown, and it's 10-0. Then Florida does nothing, and Kentucky gets the ball back, and that's when you get the 75-yard touchdown run from Ray Davis. And at that point, again, it's 16-0, and there's still, Corey, there was still 22 seconds left in the first quarter, and the team looked shell-shocked. And I think everybody watching at home certainly was too. And there was really no coming back from that. Florida had less than 50 yards in the opening quarter. So now, again, of the 3 Power 5 teams you've played, you had horrific starts against 2 of them. Just anything that could go wrong did go wrong. And I saw some people on Twitter, or the app formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, say, and I want to get everybody's take on this, say that, oh gosh, this didn't, the breaks didn't go their way kind of thing. Well, dropping a pick 6 is not a bad break. That's bad execution. Missing a wide open pass is not a bad break. Now, what a bad break is when you're down 16, trying to rally, it's 4th and 1, defensive player comes in and they call you for a false start when it probably should have been offside. That's a bad break.
100%.
And there's a difference. This was not a game that Florida had bad breaks. This was a game that Florida, quite frankly, didn't execute the plays we just talked about. Other plays too. Hey, Corey, even on that punt where Florida got called for that penalty and Kentucky got to keep the ball and then went and scored a few minutes later. Even on that play, the punt was let drop, right? Let bounce. And it bounced another 15 yards. So even if Florida would have got the ball, they lost 15 yards there. Things like that go forgotten in a game because obviously Florida didn't get the ball, the penalty erased all that. But that was a loss of 15 yards. This is a team that only had 320 yards in the game. They can't afford to give the other team 10 yards here, 15 yards there, 89 yards in penalties, drop passes, drop pick 6s. So is this what they are? Is this what they are right now? I think this is what they are, quite frankly. Now, they have time to change. They have time to grow. It's a young team still, not making excuses, but it is. It's a young team, and it also has an influx of transfers. But now you're 5 games in. Chemistry should be being built, right? You should win the next game. Then if you win the next game, you're 4-2, and you can totally redeem yourself with a win at South Carolina. But we haven't seen anything from them on the road yet. That gives you a whole lot of confidence to think that they're going to beat South Carolina on the road, LSU on the road, or Missouri on the road. I think the best bet would probably be South Carolina, but geez, what if that's a night game? And that's a tough place to play.
Even at noon, you watch their crowd at noon games when they're playing. They could be 20-point dogs to a team, and it's still crazy.
Yeah. Now I will say this. I think the thing that would give you some bit of hope against South Carolina is that their offensive line has played worse than Florida's. And that's a question. You start looking across the SEC right now, and you say, does Florida even have a top 10 offensive line in the SEC? And I don't think they do by any stretch. And so that's an issue. The defense, look, sometimes the other team's just better than you. And Kentucky, they're a strong physical team. But again, you're going to play more strong physical teams. Now, maybe that's not Vanderbilt. Maybe that's not South Carolina. But we know that is Georgia. We know that probably will be LSU. We know that absolutely will be Arkansas. Okay. Now, Missouri's a little bit kind of built a little bit differently, but they're going to play strong physical teams like Kentucky, and so they've got to figure some things out. But you see what happens when they perfectly executed everything in that first half against Tennessee. Everything. They got all the third down conversions. Corey, I think they were like 6 or 7 on third down conversions in the first half against Tennessee. And they take all the other games, and they haven't executed like that in any of them. McNeese, I don't even count. But again, against Charlotte, terrible in the red zone, terrible on third down. Today on third down, Corey, 4 of 14. And I think some of those were in the second half, quite frankly, when they were coming from behind. Yeah, kind of giving you yards.
You said about the identity of this team, Keith, about like it can't afford to make many mistakes at all. Like, it's not a team that's built on making big comebacks, built on making, playing horribly and be able to still win those games. You almost need Florida, everything almost to align perfectly in a way for them to have these big signature wins.
Yeah, and again, I think that to overreact after the Utah game would have been premature. To overreact after the game last week, and I'm beating a dead horse, the game against Charlotte would have been premature. It was a win after all, and you should never have to apologize for a win. But now we have a bigger sample size, and now there are legitimate concerns. The special teams continue to be – I'm not going to just – we're not pointing fingers at a coach. Look, it is what it is. That was a big blunder on special teams, and it's happening every game. Something is happening every game on special teams, it seems like. The offensive line continues to get overpowered by really good defenses. The team continues to struggle on the road. The team continues to start slowly on the road and then has to play catch up, which it is not built to do. So these patterns are very concerning. But again, I never give up on Florida. All right? Never give up on them. The next week's game, I know it's just Vanderbilt, but go out, win that game, and go to South Carolina and win, and you're right back on that path you were at. Look, we knew in the first month and a half of the season, Florida had 3 tricky road games. All right, they weren't going to win them all, but they need to win one of them. They need to win one of them, Corey, and they cannot lose to Vanderbilt at home. I just wonder how tight is Florida going to be next week. This is a big, big game. Okay, this is a big game. You're going to have a lot of recruits in the stands. 5-star offensive tackle Jordan Seaton of Bradenton IMG. He's supposed to be at the game. A lot of defensive players are going to be watching. It's it's a significant game. You've got to continue to show progress. Today plants that seed of doubt in everybody's head again. Okay, Jesus, it's working. It's still very early in Billy Napier's tenure, but this is not a patient world in which we live, and also, with teams growing fast through the portal, it's caused even more impatience, Corey. But I mean, again, there's a lot of troubling signs from today. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. I just think it's a group of different things they have to fix, and they're all major things in my opinion. I think the discipline stuff is stuff you can probably clean up a little bit faster. I know that's stuff that's constant coaching, getting these guys' heads. That's a big thing. But I think overall, I know I got a lot of bad feedback at the top of the year when I put 5 and 7. That's why I predicted the record to be, and I was basing it off Graham Mertz with his interception numbers, mixing with a lot of young playmakers and new replacements. And I'm starting to kind of see that like where my mind was at the time. I just think like even Eugene Wilson today, he was back in the lineup. I don't think did he have a catch, Keith, or no?
I'm looking. Let me see.
Yeah,
I don't
Eugene.
That's something we didn't get to. Eugene Wilson was listed as a starter this week,
yeah,
right? And did not have a catch in the game. I don't know. We're trying to watch the game. We're trying to write. What's up with that? Was that just a deceptive? Smoke screen deceptive tactic. I don't know, but you need him obviously. The worst. Look, okay. If there's anything promising, ETN continues to make plays.
Yeah.
Mertz hung in there. He missed a lot of, not a lot, but he missed a couple significant throws early. Andy Jean's getting more playing time. But, that was a game you really wanted to see Florida. Again, you can live with losses if you feel like a team is growing and moving in the right direction. It seems like they've gone backwards since the Tennessee game. And so, again, I mean, I think people have every right and I don't want to say right. Everybody, you have a right to say whatever you want. I mean, every reason to kind of be like, wait and see. I mean, I'm not,
But we're talking about too, Keith. We're talking about, I think someone was saying on the board with you, who was more talented, Kentucky or Florida. And you look at Florida, at least offensively, you have ETN. You obviously, before the game, we would always have Florida that has the better backs. But Kentucky, obviously, they made a strong case today as well. But I think lack of playmakers. I mean, outside of Ricky Pearsall, I mean, if you're a Florida fan, who are you confident in as far as getting that ball and making that game-changing play? I mean, Graham Mertz, the way he gets out of the pocket, he's responsible for a lot of that, making sure, keep his eyes downfield, playing with that experience. Ricky Pearsall has made a lot of big-time plays the last couple of weeks. But outside of him, Eugene Wilson, that's why having him come back, I thought that was key. But you can't just have, when you're in the University of Florida, you're in obviously the most talent-rich state. You can't have a true freshman be your most talent, Ricky Pearsall's most productive, but I think talent-wise, he's probably neck and neck with Eugene. So it's kind of, I think lack of talent's another thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's some talent, but it's young talent, and it takes a while. But, forget about all that. I get that. I get that this isn't the most talented roster that Florida's ever had, and the fans understand that. But they don't want to see you fall behind 16-0 in the first half against Kentucky.
That's the troubling part.
First quarter, and you've done nothing right. And you've handed them the ball back when you stopped them on third down, and you made them punt. You gave it back to them. And you couldn't hit the open receiver for a deep ball that would have been a touchdown. And you dropped the pick six, and you commit one penalty after the other. And they've got to figure out somehow what they're doing on the road that's not working. Now, obviously, the Swamp is an unbelievable home field advantage. I think it's one of the 2 or 3 best home field advantages that I've experienced in the country. I've been everywhere, okay? And I think the top 2 or 3 are all in the SEC. I think LSU, Auburn, and Florida are at the top, okay? So there's a distinct advantage there. So I get that. But you've got to be able to do something on the road, okay? Teams win road games all the time. Teams look decent on the road all the time. So what are you doing that's not working? What is just not working? And and another thing, if the roster's not where it should be, if the offensive line, for instance, isn't where it should be, should that have been more addressed more through the portal? And you can say all day long that there weren't enough guys in the portal, and maybe that's true. Maybe that's true. But maybe one more guy helps you. And unfortunately for Florida, they had that one more guy on the offensive line, Keontae Gooden, the transfer who left the program this summer because of his family issues.
Well, even Cameron Waits, who started had starting experience from a season ago. He's another guy. Obviously, Nick reported today that he was out there, and he had a pretty significant injury over in fall camp. So I thought maybe he's just to get him warmed up. I didn't think he was actually going to get on the field today. But Keith, you said something about being on the road, what's not working for them. And some of the greater good put it too, the comment on the right. 9 penalties at Utah, 10 penalties at Kentucky. And I feel like both those games, you have that early false start when the crowd's loud.
Yeah.
And then also that confidence starts to drift and you're looking around at each other. I just think this team has struggled when in those hostile environments trying to get on that rhythm. I think there were more pre-snap penalties at Utah today. There were some pre-snap ones, obviously, but there were some holds, hands to the face. And those are more penalties where you're probably outmanned a little bit. So you got to hold. You got to, I don't know. One of the holds was on a long play. It was kind of questionable, quite frankly. It didn't really impact the play, but nonetheless, it was just a kind of a deflating loss for Florida. But again, turn around, win this coming weekend, next weekend, and then see what you got at South Carolina. But they've got to figure out again, what you're doing on the road is not working at all. Okay, dating back to last season. So are they going to have to mix things up? Are they going to have to change strategy? What can they do? Right? What can they do? And I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not sure anybody does. One thing is, Keith, if they do, like I said, if someone told me right now, how do you think Vanderbilt and Florida's going to play? I'm picking Florida. I think, at home, I know they're going to be juiced up, ready to go. But if they do lose that game to Vanderbilt, say they do, where does this program at going forward from a confidence standpoint? Where's the program at from where Billy Napier's job is? I feel like because if you lose to Vanderbilt, which, like I said, I'm picking them to win, you go to South Carolina, then you have a hard schedule on the road. Getting away from Gainesville, something you haven't really done a good job of. So it's going to be interesting. And that's why I think Keith and I have been hammering how important this game is against Vandy coming up. And if you had told me that 3 years ago, that that's the key game right now in the schedule for the Florida Gators football program, I'd probably laugh. So we'll just see where it goes.
Well, and that's not, we had somebody mention in the comments that, look, you're talking about beating South Carolina 10 years ago. You'd have been laughed at for calling that a big game. And there is something to be said for that. Florida's been through a few coaching changes here, and sometimes you got to be careful what you wish for. But you have to sometimes nobody wants to hear this. Sometimes you've got to take a couple steps back to take several steps forward. You just pray to God. If you're a Florida fan, this is one of these cases, because right now you're just not seeing a ton. You're not seeing a ton. Now, if the defense, maybe that was an anomaly for the defense. For the team as a whole, I think you can have some real questions, but this is a pattern. But for the defense, that really was their first bad outing of the season, right? And so perhaps they can pull things together. The next 2 weeks are going to be key. And by the way, Georgia, it's a season by season, a week by week season every year. And so you go into this season thinking, Georgia, boy, they're going to be tough to beat again. Well, as we speak right now, they're losing at Auburn 10-0. You just don't know. That's why you keep playing. That's why you keep trying to get better in practice every day. That's why you keep trying to improve on Saturdays as a player and as a coach. You hope for the best and you hope you get better. But right now, today, Florida was probably worse today than it was in week one in some respects.
That's why it's so hard for me to get really in love with these early season rankings, even from a stat. When you look at stats in the rankings, I know Florida was number one in the SEC coming in and top 5, I think, nationally, but you could see certain points throughout the year with Charlotte and McNeese State. You knew that they're a good defense, they're improved, but did I feel like they were number one in the SEC coming in? Probably not. I just knew as the season would go on.
But definitely not.
Yeah, as the season goes on, it's going to start to narrow out a little bit. But I do like, though, one thing I will mention about Florida's defense, I think their effort level. I like Jordan Castell. I feel like I hear his name on every play. You don't want your safety leading the team in tackles all the time. Obviously, that says a lot about where your defense is at times, too. But I think also the effort level has been there, but there's a lot of things to clean up as well.
Well, the effort level was there some plays, but then other plays today, I questioned it a little bit.
Yeah, like you say, you don't get a medal for effort. It's about results. So.
Yeah, I mean, they just look. I mean, they're a work in progress. They've got to somehow figure out how to regroup. Now, kids will rebound faster than all of us and faster than the fans. They'll put it behind them quick. They will be. Everybody wants them to be angry after this game and be angry all week. It doesn't work that way. You don't want them to be that tight. You want them to be, hey man, we can do this thing. Let's not dwell on this. In sports, what do they have? The 24-hour rule or 48-hour rule, whatever it is. You celebrate your wins for a day. You cry over the losses for a day, and then you get your ass back to work. All right. And so fans can be pissy for a week or weeks about this last game, but they can't. They got to get right back at it and see what happens. I mean, there are some pieces there. The defense, Randy makes a great point here. The defense has improved, but it's still an issue with missed tackles and extra yards after initial contact. Corey and I that's a great point, Randy. Corey and I were talking about that during the Tennessee game. You notice even Tennessee, which Florida beat the brakes off of, when one of their running backs had the ball and he got hit, he always still got an extra yard or two.
Yeah.
When a Florida back, once he got hit, now ETN makes people miss. I'm saying once he's wrapped up, that's it. It's done. They're pushed back. And something about that Florida defense where even when a guy's tackled, they're always falling forward, it seems like. I'd love to know the stat. I'd love to know the stat against good teams. I bet it's a lot. I bet it's more than 50% of the time the guy's falling forward against Florida. So, yeah, there's some things to be cleaned up, but there's still some promise on defense. I mean, look, Kentucky is not a terrible offensive team. They're not. But to see them run the ball that effectively is what's troubling, obviously, because your pride and joy at Florida is running the ball and stopping the run right now. That's sort of your identity. And you didn't do either one today. And you didn't do either one against Utah, quite frankly, either. So if you're not very good at what you're supposed to be good at, you don't have a lot to hang your hat on.
A lot of Deion Sanders comments throughout this whole entire show. So a lot of people.
I'm looking at some of it. Yeah. Go ahead, Corey.
No, all I was going to say real quick, though, it's just you see this loss and how it affects certain fan bases. Is people are saying, hey, new coach, new offensive coordinator, or, hey, get Deion. And it just shows right now, Florida's one of those fan bases, man. Like I said, they speak out, and understandably so. They want the results that, they deserve. It's one of the best, what was it, Keith, number one public university? What was the stat that you and I were talking about?
Wall Street Journal, I think, has got Florida the number one public university.
Either way, talent-rich state. I mean, Florida has all the resources in the world to be a power, year in and year out. And that's why I understand where the Florida fans are coming from.
Well, we say that, but it's also been kind of a meat grinder job. They used to say that about Florida in the 60s and 70s. In fact, it was Alabama's great coach, Bear Bryant, that basically said, there's too many other distractions in Florida for them to ever win. And I think he might have also said something like, or the concern across the SEC. Remember, the SEC started in 1931. Florida didn't contend for a title until the 60s. Didn't even contend for a title. Didn't win one. Had many missed opportunities, missed extra points, missed field goals. Didn't actually win one until 84. That was stripped next year. So they didn't get their first official title until 1991, Corey, 60 years after the start of the SEC. So, they always said if Florida could get it going, look out. And a couple coaches have consistently won at Florida, but more than a couple have not got it going. Doug Dickey could never get it going. Charlie Pell sort of did, but he cheated and he got fired. Muschamp, Ron Zook couldn't get it going. Recruited well, but couldn't win. Muschamp recruited well, couldn't win. So it's a difficult place. Yeah, despite all the resources, history tells us that it still is a difficult place to consistently win. And don't forget, you're also playing one of the most challenging schedules in college football every year. Okay, I love people always take shots at Florida. They didn't play a road game, a true road game from 1991 until this year out of state. They played Michigan and Texas, a neutral site game, all that stuff. But they didn't have to go on the road and play people. They were playing FSU every year. And so while they were playing FSU every year, Georgia's one tough non-conference game was Georgia Tech. So, I don't think Florida ever has to apologize for its schedule, Corey.
Keith, one thing that's going to be interesting too for once in a while, Florida State, Miami. Miami, the last 2 or 3 coaches, they recruit well, but on the field they're struggling, right? You're certain FSU, obviously, how they're playing. Miami's kind of on the upswing too on the field. With Florida's struggles right now, with a lot of these in-state battles, Jamari Howard, LJ McCray, Zane Mincy, the list goes on. It's going to be interesting now. This year is going to be different compared to other years past, where Florida's saying, hey, we're rebuilding. We're kind of come into our program, help us be the change, while the other 2, big in-state powers are trending up on the field, and they're obviously doing a good job recruiting. And you couldn't say that in probably recent memory, and it's kind of a weird spot for Florida to be in that they haven't been in.
Yeah, it's whoops, I'm all getting all my signals crossed here. It's a challenging time for Florida right now, no doubt. Recruiting is going well. Let's see how the next few weeks shake out. We've got 2 big Florida commitments visiting Auburn today. Jamonte Waller, the 4-star inside linebacker / edge, and Amir Jackson, the 4-star tight end. They can ill afford to lose either one of those recruits, especially Amir Jackson, because he is Florida's only tight end commit. You do not want to have to start from scratch. So we're going to be monitoring those 2 recruitments closely. Elsewhere, we think of the Florida's 21 commitments. Most of them are solid, if not all. But they're going to be watching things closely. They're going to be watching patterns. Other schools are going to be trying to poach them. And, it's going to be interesting. But anyway, I think that will do it for this edition of the post-game Gators On Live show. Sorry, I'm sick. Keith Niebuhr of Gators Online, Corey Bender of Gators Online. We're both battling these tricky illnesses here. And but we wanted to let people vent. It's been it was a long, disappointing 3.5 hours watching that game, because it just you had so much hope after the Tennessee game. If you're a Florida fan, coach, player, has Florida turned the program? And I think everybody in that building thought that Gators HQ, Gators headquarters, thought that this was a program that had probably turned the corner. That could now, the next step would be to go on the road and win on the road. And they didn't do it. And not only did they not do it, Corey, it wasn't a 4-quarter game. So again, 2 road games this year. Neither one of them was a true 4-quarter game. You could argue that they were only down 13, I guess, at one point, and could have made it a little closer with Utah. But Utah controlled that game. Kentucky controlled this game. So the next step, go home, play Vanderbilt. You better beat them, and you need to put up some kind of fight at South Carolina. So anyway, that'll do it. If you like what we're doing, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Feel free to leave more comments. We'll get back to each of you. And go to GatorsOnline.com right now. $1, get your foot in the door. $1 gets you 1 month of the best in Gators coverage all day long, every day. Take care, everybody.